And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. I'm your host, Derek. This is episode 64. This is the Week 8 preview episode where the Philadelphia Eagles come into Paycor Stadium at 4-2 to take on the Cincinnati Bengals with a record of 3-4. Bengals are winless at home so far, 0-3 at home. Bengals are looking to change that around. And this is going to be the White Bengal game. They're going to wear their white helmets, white uniforms. The fans are all encouraged to wear white clothes. So it's going to be not quite as eye-catching as it would be when it was like the night game and they had everybody in white, but still pretty cool. This game is going to be at 1 o'clock. Originally, it was scheduled to be a 4:25 game with Jim Nantz and Tony Romo in like the primetime slot. But they decided that the Chicago Bears and Washington Commanders, with the top number 1 and number 2 overall picks in the draft, since they're playing pretty well, it would be maybe a more enticing matchup for the NFL fan base to watch. So they got flip-flopped. Now Bengals play on CBS at 1 o'clock instead of 4:25. That was news to Ja'Marr Chase. He didn't know about that. He said he's not really a morning person. He prefers to have the game in the later afternoons, but that's how it goes sometimes. So we're going to have Ian Eagle, Charles Davis, Evan Washburn on the call. Another good announced crew. So we're not going to get like Spiro Ditas and Adam Archuleta like they had for the Browns game last week. This is going to be a game of an entirely different color than brown. Like, this is going to be a test that the Bengals haven't faced since the Ravens. And this is going to be another opportunity to get a win. They haven't gotten a win at home. They're favored, surprisingly, to win this game. The Bengals are favored by 2.5 points in Las Vegas early to open with. There's some news that may change that, though. There's some injury news that we'll talk about that may change the line a little bit. But on the ESPN analytics predictions, they have the Eagles winning by 55%. Bengals have a 45% chance to win. So there's a little bit of a disagreement between ESPN analytics and Las Vegas odds makers, although the home team gets 3 points. So maybe on a neutral site, Vegas would call this an even matchup between these two teams. But there's some injuries that'll play a role in this. There's some key matchups we're going to talk about in this game. It's going to be a good matchup. I'm hoping just for a better game to watch than what we saw against like the Giants and the Browns. But they were asking Joe Burrow about, what's wrong with the offense now? You guys aren't scoring as many points as you were early in the season. And he was like, well, I don't really care because we're winning. So we were scoring 30 points a game and losing. And now we're scoring, like 21, 17 points a game and we're winning. So really, that's the only thing that matters. And obviously, that's true. It's just that as the, kind of the captain of the offense, as Joe Burrow, he gets all the attention. They don't really focus in on the defense too much, but they're starting to do a little bit more. Mike Hilton, Cam Taylor-Britt, they're getting a little bit more time in the sun. There was an episode of From the Jungle Juice with Cam Taylor-Britt. So a little bit of a similar to, they had the backstories of some of the players last season, like Cordell Volson and Logan Wilson and a bunch of, did they do Ted Karras? I think they did Ted Karras too. So they're diversifying the player base that they're doing these profiles of. And so they're getting Cam Taylor-Britt got his profile. Well, I don't know who they're going to have next. Maybe I could see Chase Brown or Andre Iosivas being another good person to do as a profile. So we'll see how that goes. But speaking of Chase Brown, he is the Bengals' number 1, or seems like he's taken over the lead role as running back. He's getting most of the carries. He's number 30 for the Bengals when they're on offense. And Chase Brown's twin brother plays for the Philadelphia Eagles as a safety, Sidney Brown. I don't think he's starting, but he's a backup free safety. He tore his ACL last season, but he had a pick 6, pretty long kick return. And brother Sidney plays for the Eagles on defense. Chase plays on offense. So there's a possibility that they could be in on the same play, and brother against brother could have to be like maybe, one brother trying to tackle the other one or make a move on the other brother. So that could be an interesting matchup of two twin brothers playing against each other in an NFL game. I don't know if that has happened. It can't be very frequently that twin brothers play. I guess like the Barbers, Tiki and Rondé Barber probably played each other offense and defense. So similar type of situation to those two. That'll be a big storyline to watch, of course. And also, some former Bengals are playing on the Eagles. Fred Johnson, if you remember big old Fred, number 74, he was a backup swing tackle for the Bengals. They picked him off the Steelers. I think it might have been during the pandemic or the year before in 2019, but they got Fred Johnson on the roster, and I think his uncle was like a famous NBA basketball player. So he's got like the height, but he's going to be going up against Trey Hendrickson. Fred Johnson is not their Eagles' normal starting left tackle. That's Jordan Mailata, but he was placed on injured reserve with an injury, so he's going to be out. Eagles are going to be without their starting left tackle, and also their starting right guard, Mekhi Becton, went out of last week's game with a concussion, and he's not going to be able to play in this game against the Bengals either. So Eagles are going to be down two of their starting offensive linemen, two huge starting offensive linemen, like physically and figuratively. Jordan Mailata is like 6'8", 350 plus pounds. Mekhi Becton, very similar, like 6'7", 360. Their backups are coming in are like, I say only 6'6", 320. I mean, these guys are light, only 320 pounds. So I guess the Bengals are getting off a little bit easy in that regard, because that's suddenly become a strength of this Bengals defense. Their defensive line, which was so much maligned, and they had guys coming in like Lawrence Guy off the couch to play against some of these early game opponents. Now they've got a full squad of like their rookies, Chris Jenkins, McKinley Jackson. They're backing up. They got BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankins are finally back from their injuries. Sam Hubbard is getting healthy. Trey Hendrickson is being Trey Hendrickson and getting about 1 or 2 sacks a game. You can just, it's like clockwork. Just count on Trey Hendrickson getting a couple sacks, maybe a strip sack. So hopefully the Bengals will have a bit of the advantage when they're on defense. And that's really the biggest thing that's dictated whether the Bengals win or lose, because the offense, it's always, most of the time, has done enough to win the game, but it's the defense that let them down. With the exception of that Patriots game where, if they didn't have Charlie Jones fumble the punt return and they didn't have Tanner Hudson fumble the ball like at the 1 yard line, the offense maybe could have done something in that game too. But the other thing that was holding the Bengals offense back in those first couple games was no Tee Higgins. Right before the first game, just when it was looking like Ja'Marr Chase was going to be coming back and make his first appearance of all training camp, Tee Higgins pulled his hamstring in that last practice before the first game, and then he had to miss the first 2 games, which the Bengals lost. They lost to the Patriots and they lost to the Chiefs, those first 2 games without T. And it made a big difference. The Bengals tried to supplement it by using their tight ends like Mike Gesicki and Tanner Hudson more, but there's really no replacing Tee Higgins. Like we've seen, like Chris Collinsworth pointed out, like people were asking, is Tee Higgins worth the franchise tag, the 21.8? When he's healthy, when he's able to stay on the field, absolutely 100%, yes, he's worth it. The only issue, and maybe the only reason why the Bengals were reluctant to give Tee Higgins that long-term contract extension, besides the fact that he's going to want more money than they probably want to pay, is the fact that he hasn't been able to stay healthy. I don't know if he's played a complete season without missing at least a few games here and there. It seems like he's always got something pops up, and for whatever reason, he's, it's not easy to play a 17-game schedule in the NFL when you're taking hits. You got to practice and play, and it's easy for injuries to kind of accumulate. So I understand it, but just in terms of durability, somebody like Ja'Marr Chase, he's a little bit more durable overall than T. But this Friday, another similar situation happened where Tee Higgins came up on the injury report with a quad injury. I don't know if he had been limited. Friday was the first day he had been limited. He had been a full participant, wasn't listed on the injury report at all. Then all of a sudden, Friday he's listed, and now he's questionable for the game. So we'll have to watch what happens with Tee Higgins this coming, weekend. Heading the morning into the game, they're probably going to wait and see before they announce whether he's going to play or not. But that's going to be a huge factor in this game, whether or not Tee Higgins plays. Because if he's out, then the Bengals are going to have to rely more on Ja'Marr Chase, Andre Yosivage. Maybe, I guess they would play Trenton Irwin, maybe Jermaine Burton. People have talked about Jermaine Burton, the rookie third-round pick. He was inactive 2 weeks ago, then he was active last week, but he hasn't really played at all. He hasn't gotten any. He has one catch, I think, on the season, but he hasn't really played at all. And then people were talking about, he doesn't know the playbook. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know where to line up, all this stuff, which is crazy when you consider the fact that Amari Cooper got traded from the Browns to the Bills on like a Tuesday, and he was playing in the game for the Bills and caught a touchdown pass for the Bills that same week. And Devontae Adams got traded from the Raiders to the Jets, and he played in a game that week for the team that he got traded to. And there's multiple examples of this, of like wide receivers getting traded from one team to another. I think DeAndre Hopkins just got traded to the Chiefs, which we don't like to see that, but at least he got traded after the Bengals played the Chiefs. But DeAndre Hopkins got traded from the Titans to the Chiefs. He's got a chance to play. And obviously these are all like veteran receivers who've got 10 years in the league. They're not rookies like Jermaine Burton. But still, it just goes to show, like, when they say, Jermaine Burton doesn't know what to do. Well, there's guys who are coming in with literally like 1 or 2 days of time to practice, and they were playing in the game. So it's got to be more than just he can't learn the plays. It's got to be something else, that they just don't have any confidence in Jermaine Burton to go in and execute what they need him to do. But hopefully we won't have to worry about that. Hopefully T is able to play in this game, because they're going to need him, because the Eagles' defense is pretty formidable in itself. They are more healthy than their offense, especially on the defensive line. They've got a ton of studs up front, and Joe Burrow found that out in his rookie season when he played the Eagles. They tied. Last time the Eagles and Bengals played, they went to overtime, and it ended in a tie, and that was the game that Dan Horde, the Bengals radio announcer, pointed out was probably the most and the hardest that Joe Burrow has ever been hit in a game in his NFL career. They asked him in the press conference this week, they asked Joe Burrow, was that the most he'd ever gotten hit? And he tried to play it off like, I don't know. I mean, hard to say. I get hit in games every week. I've been hit lots of times, so I can't really remember. It's like, no, trust me, Joe Burrow. I was watching that game. He got annihilated. He almost got his head taken off. There was that one play, he scrambled out to his left, and he tried to come back over the middle of the field and throw it while he was running back to his right. And some guy, just like a T-bone car accident, some guy was just running like top speed, speared Joe Burrow right as he threw the ball. Joe Burrow was down for the count on that one. That was one of the few times where Joe Burrow could not just like get up and keep going to the next play. But he had to sit out a couple plays on that one. They brought Ryan Finley in for the rest of that drive, I think, because he got hit so hard. So yeah, that Joe Burrow, he could try to act like he didn't get hurt, but that blew Joe Burrow up. But hopefully we don't have a repeat of that. But there's some guys who are like Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean, inside linebacker who can blitz, Josh Sweat. They got a bunch of guys up front who I think they sacked Daniel Jones like 7 times last week against the Giants. Almost every drive the Giants had got stopped because they got a sack, and then they were playing like 3rd and 15 every snap or every series. So Giants couldn't get anything going. But it was hard to tell, was the Eagles' defense really that good in holding the Giants to only 3 points? I mean, the Bengals held the Giants to 7 points. I wouldn't say the Bengals have like the best defense, but Eagles defense statistically is like a top 5 defense, and their cornerbacks, their safeties are very athletic. They've got Darius Slay, who's been multi-Pro Bowler, and a rookie Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo, first-round pick. It's gonna be interesting to see how they match up with Ja'Marr Chase, who they put on him. They've also got Cooper DeJean, who's like their nickel cornerback / linebacker, but Cooper DeJean also returns punts for the Eagles, number 33. I think he's 33. Let me double check. Either that or Reed Blankenship is. Yeah, Cooper DeJean out of Iowa, 6 feet, 198. He's only got. Has he played in every game? I'm looking at Cooper DeJean's stats. He's only got 10 tackles. Maybe he didn't play that much on defense the first few games. They're working him in a little bit more, I guess, as he goes. But I don't know, he didn't look that physical. But they got a bunch of guys. Reed Blankenship and Zach Bond is their leading tackler for the Eagles defense. I think he went to Wisconsin. Yeah, 3rd-round pick out of Wisconsin. He was kind of like an outside linebacker, edge rusher. I guess they've moved him into inside linebacker now because he's only 225 pounds. So his body type is a fit more for inside linebacker. And he wasn't going to really make it as an edge rusher. And they've got plenty of defensive linemen who are probably more effective than he would be. So that's an interesting move from the Eagles on defense. But Bengals offensive line has been able to hold up. Like Dexter Lawrence for the Giants leads the NFL in sacks. He only, quote unquote, only had 1 sack against the Bengals. So he didn't go off and go crazy. Bengals offensive interior, their line, it'll be interesting to see how they stack up against Jalen Carter, especially. He, number 98 for the Eagles, had that issue with the racing when he was at Georgia, had the car accident, and they weren't sure if he was going to drop down in the draft, but he still went like number 8 or number 9 in the draft overall. So huge disruptive force for the Eagles on the inside. It's going to be a challenge for Ted Karras and Volson, Alex Kappa, all those guys. Bengals are probably going to continue to use their 2 tight end sets, Eric All and Drew Sample, a lot. And we'll have to watch and see how much Zach Moss plays in this game or if they have Chase Brown out there more. But the thing about Chase Brown is I haven't seen him pass block very much at all. They usually have Chase Brown in either to run the ball or to catch the ball out of the backfield, but they haven't asked him to pass protect as much as they have with Zach Moss. So that could be, it's maybe just comes down to how the game is going. If the Bengals need to pass the ball a lot, they may use Zach Moss more at running back. But so many former Bengals on this Eagles roster. The place kicker for the Eagles, Jake Elliott, he was a 5th round pick of the Bengals in 2017. Bengals had him on their roster, and he's gone on to be one of the best kickers in the NFL, but the Bengals let him go in training camp, and for some reason they kept Fat Randy Bullock on the roster instead of Jake Elliott, and he went off to the Eagles, and he's been there ever since. They got him, and then I want to say, so they got Fred Johnson, Jake Elliott, and then, is he still on the roster? I'm looking for John Ross. Maybe John Ross, former wide receiver for the Bengals, at one point was on this Eagles roster. Maybe not anymore. Maybe he went on to some other team. But John Ross used to play for the Eagles. The biggest thing to watch out for the Bengals when they're on defense, though, is Saquon Barkley, the running back for the Eagles. He is kind of like the Ja'Marr Chase equivalent for the Eagles offense. Like in terms of they play different positions, but I mean in terms of how much defenses need to watch out for a specific player. When the Eagles are on defense, most of the eyes are going to be on Ja'Marr Chase. Where he's going, what he's doing, the Eagles defense is going to have to react. Same thing with the Bengals. When they're on defense, they're going to have to react to Saquon Barkley. When he gets the ball, he had a career day last week. He had almost 175 yards rushing, and he had a number of very long runs. If he got a good block, he was doing spin moves on guys, so the Bengals are going to have to do a good job of tackling on defense, getting him down. Jalen Hurts, the quarterback for the Eagles, he's a good runner also. He's their second leading rusher, 4 rushing touchdowns as well for Jalen Hurts. Not as effective as a passer, but I think part of that is because his leading receiver, A.J. Brown, was out for 3 or 4 games early in the season with a pulled hamstring. He's their best wide receiving threat. They also have Devontae Smith, former Heisman Trophy winner, and former first-round draft pick Jahan Dotson, who got traded at the beginning of the season from the Washington Commanders to the Eagles. So a bunch of first-round picks on the Eagles. Maybe if you want to compare like who has the top wide receiving group in the NFL, you could put the Bengals top 2 up against the Eagles top 2, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith versus Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins. It's a pretty even battle. But then I wouldn't necessarily say Jahan Dotson is on par with Andre Iosivas. So, I mean, saying like Jahan Dotson, first-round pick, Andre Iosivas, 6th-round pick. But if I check the stats, Jahan Dotson, does he have 6 catches, 35 yards, no touchdowns? So Andre Iosivas has better stats this season. But one of the big keys, I mentioned that the Eagles had a lot of injuries on their offensive line. They're also going to be without their starting tight end in Dallas Goedert. So Grant Calcaterra, Jack Stoll, and also Albert Oebunam is supposed to be coming back off of injured reserve. So Dallas Goedert was one of the top receiving threats for the Eagles. Hasn't been that effective this year, but 24 catches, 300 yards, no touchdowns for Dallas Goedert so far this year. I think he had, what was it last year? He was injured with he had a broken arm or something that he was able to play through, but no Dallas Goedert for the Eagles. That'll be interesting to see if that affects them in the run game or the pass game. Oh, man, another one. Look at C.J. Uzomah. No, wait, did he get cut? Is C.J. Uzomah on the Eagles? He is. So that's another Bengal, I just realized. C.J. Uzomah, former tight end of the Bengals. When they went to the Super Bowl, he wore number 87. He wears number 47 for the Eagles now. But I don't think CJ is going to be on the active roster for this game. But so many former Bengals playing for this Eagles team. They're going to have a homecoming of sorts. So that'll be an interesting storyline to watch in this game. The biggest thing is everybody talking about, can the Bengals get back to 500? Meaning, can the Bengals get back to 4 wins, 4 losses, even 50%? Ja'Marr Chase apparently had never heard of the term 500 because somebody asked him, what does it mean to get back to 500? He's like, I don't even know what that means. What does that mean, 500? I was trying to think, it's not a intuitive thing if you've never heard, looked at a baseball box score, because batting averages, they talk about in 3 digits, like batting 300 or batting 275 or whatever. So in baseball, they use that kind of terminology. In football, I feel like it's pretty common in terms of winning percentages for a team. If you're 1-3, you've got 1 win, 3 losses out of 4 games total, 25%. You'd say you're 250 win percentage. And so when you're close to 500, people talk about that all the time. Get to 500, get over 500. It's kind of a measuring stick because most of the time, if you're over 500, you have a good chance of making it to the playoffs. But anyway, Ja'Marr Chase had never heard of that. And I was trying to think, how old was I when I learned what 500 meant? and probably in high school or earlier, right? But it just shows you like how young these guys are and how, I mean, not worldly they can be. It's because they have to focus so much of their time and attention on playing football. And Ja'Marr Chase is still, a young guy, so he talks about how he played like Call of Duty on PlayStation all the time. So he's playing video games, he's playing football. He doesn't have time to learn what words mean, man. Okay? So Ja'Marr Chase, he's never heard of 500. He didn't know what time the game was starting at. So there's all kinds of stuff Ja'Marr Chase doesn't know about, but it doesn't matter. Because when you throw the ball to Ja'Marr Chase, he's going to be open. He's going to catch it most of the time, and then he's going to score a touchdown. That's all he needs to worry about. All the Bengals need to worry about is paying him. But who knows? Maybe he's got a very like Chad Johnson persona that he's kind of keeping under wraps. He said that Zach Taylor talked to him during the offseason and told him, you don't need to say so much. Basically, like, don't talk so much and give these reporters bulletin board quotes, like with the Elves, playing the Cleveland Elves and whatever. Like, you don't need to say so much necessarily. Maybe say less. Zach Taylor loves saying less. I think Zach Taylor, when he goes to these press conferences, his objective is to say nothing at all. So you never see a quote or headline of Zach Taylor says XYZ. There's a lot of stories in the NFL media cycle about how the Patriots head coach called his players soft, even though he said collectively as a team, we're collectively a soft football team. And people were like, oh, I can't believe the coach would call his players soft. That's fighting words, all that kind of stuff. So that's exactly what Zach Taylor is trying to avoid at all costs. He doesn't want any headlines involving Zach Taylor whatsoever. The only headline we saw this season was Zach Taylor says, quote, Ja'Marr Chase will be practicing, and then the next day, quote, Zach Taylor says, I put my foot in my mouth. Ja'Marr Chase was not actually practicing, so I don't know what I was talking about. So that's exactly the reason why Zach Taylor doesn't want to say anything. But a lot of people like Zach Taylor for whatever reason. I don't know why. They love him, even though he's got a losing record. But they're very supportive. They're positive, and good for those people. I'm not one of those people. I don't think Zach Taylor is necessarily a great football coach or a inspirational, charismatic leader. And it's weird because I respect that Zach Taylor knows he's not charismatic. He knows he doesn't have any personality. He knows he's boring and uninteresting. And he is who he is. I don't fault him for that. But at the same time, you kind of want your head coach to be charismatic and have an engaging, energetic, inspiring personality that's going to lead a team of men and not, just be a complete milquetoast and have, you want somebody who can get a fire lit under some of these guys. And so I've never been impressed with Zach Taylor in that regard. But the point of me saying all this is because the reason I do this show obviously is not for popularity. It's not for money. I just wanted to give you a perspective, my own honest opinion on things, because a lot of podcasts wouldn't have any criticism of Zach Taylor. They wouldn't. Some of them do. Some of them give fair criticism. Some of it's unfair criticism of Zach Taylor. But a lot of podcasts are what I would think of as like more Homer podcasts. I try not to be a Homer podcast. So if you're looking for a Homer podcast, if you've listened all the way to this episode, you probably figured that out by now. But I try not to be a Homer. What's a Homer? Meaning like somebody who always takes the side of their team, no matter what. It doesn't matter what the call is, what the circumstances is. They're always going to have the team side. So I try to have my own opinions. I try not to listen to other podcasts before I record my own. But sometimes I go back and listen to those shows. I mean, because I love listening to podcasts, and I listen to so many Bengals podcasts, and after a while you listen to so many, and they all sound the same. To me, they all sounded like they were saying very small variations on the same thing. So I wanted to have a podcast that says something different. That's what I'm going for. But also, when I went back and listened to some of the podcasts from last week's show, almost all of them were complaining about the referees and how the referees were so bad in the game against the Browns. Terrible calls. Couldn't believe it. The referees should be fired. This, that, and the other thing. But the Browns got like 3 times more penalties called on them than the Bengals. And so these shows that complain about how terrible the referees were and how bad the calls were, they didn't complain about any of the calls that went against the Browns. They only complained about the calls that went against the Bengals. Those are the only calls they ever have any issue with. So it's always a one-way street with those type of people. I try to take a more neutral, objective look at things. So the perfect example was people were saying Ja'Marr Chase, there was a defensive pass interference penalty that they called uncatchable pass, picked up the penalty flag. People were saying, oh, what a terrible penalty flag that they should have never picked up. These referees don't know what they're doing. No pass is uncatchable for Ja'Marr Chase, which is ridiculous. There's got to be some limits. Ja'Marr Chase isn't literally Superman where he could jump up and fly 10 yards in front of him and grab the ball out of nowhere. So yes, he did get tugged, but no, it wasn't catchable. And maybe that's just because having played the game, I feel like a lot of fans, they don't know the rules of the game at all. They've never played, but if one call goes against them, just like the fans who boo about anything, they just want to say, oh, that was a bad call. Why was it a bad call? Well, because it went against the team that I'm rooting for. So I don't like it because it went against my team. That's why it was a bad call in their mind. But players don't usually complain about calls. They don't care. The call is the call. They live with it and they move on to the next play. You don't see players most of the time getting upset about, oh, the referees had it in for us and they were, making bad calls against us. And the only exception I would say would be in a game like the Vikings game last night where Sam Darnold got pulled down by his face mask. It was an obvious face mask penalty that was not called against the Los Angeles Rams defender. Vikings probably would have lost the game anyway, but that is one of the only situations where I could say, okay, you're perfectly justified getting upset as a fan or a player or a coach or anybody as just a neutral spectator watching where they obviously miss a horrible blown call. A lot of these calls that people are getting upset about for the Bengals, they could go one way or the other, but since they went against the Bengals, oh, it's a terrible call. If the call goes in the favor of the Bengals, people will say, oh, well, it could go either way, but, we'll just look the other way. We won't pay attention to the ones that go for the Bengals. So all of that to say, I hope the Bengals win. I'm hoping for a good game more than anything. I just want an interesting, fun game with no injuries, nobody getting carted off. That's what you never see that in other sports, or very rarely do you see other sports where that's a commonplace thing of guy getting carted off, immobilized on a stretcher and loaded into an ambulance. And then everybody claps. And then we all say, well, get the next guy in there. Next man up. When nobody really pays attention to the guy who's on his way to the hospital. You don't see that in other sports. And so that's just one of the things that was in the headlines because Tua Tagovailoa, the quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, is going to be making his return to the field this week after suffering another concussion earlier against the Buffalo Bills this season. Knocked himself out cold on the field and went into the fencing posture, hands up next to his head. He's coming back this week. He appreciates your concern, but he's not going to be wearing a Guardian cap because it's his personal choice to get knocked out again. And I think there's got to be some kind of rule or policy I don't know who the doctors are that are clearing Tua to return without wearing a guardian cap. It should be like, if I was a doctor, I would say, okay, the only way that I would clear you to play again is if you wear one of these protective guardian caps, which have been proven to significantly reduce the risk of concussions and head injuries. So there's really no good explanation or reason why Tua wouldn't want to wear one just out of stubbornness. And, that's going to risk his health. I guess, the players are going out there risking their health, guardian cap or not. It's not going to protect him from all the injuries he could possibly face on the field. But as a spectator and a fan of the NFL, nobody wants to see a guy, like we saw against the Bengals, like, in a horrible state on the field. Nobody wants to see that, basically. That's the kind of thing where parents won't let their kids play football if that's the kind of thing that happens to their child. So hopefully there's no injuries in this Bengals game or in any game, but we know that's not realistic. But Bengals have been on a good streak of keeping their players healthy. Hopefully that continues. Hopefully this win streak continues for the Bengals and they make it 3 in a row and get back to 500 and get the first win in Paycor Stadium of the season. That would be amazing if they could finally get that one out of the way. But after the game, we'll come back and break down everything as we always do. So don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, rating, all that kind of stuff. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Until next time, I'm going to leave you with a hooday and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.